Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another DeJuan Elliott Music Podcast. Thank you guys for hitting me up in the comments with my last episode. Wow. I am impressed. You guys are loving it here. Well, I love you too. Thank you guys so much. Give yourselves another round of applause for coming in for another episode of the DeJuan Elliott Music Podcast. And I got a question to ask you guys. I have one question to ask you guys, man. Look, what happened to all the bands when it comes to music? Am I right, guys, or what? What happened to all the bands? All you see today is solo artists. It's like society has just basically turned art into what society is, and that is, it's all about self. It's all about me. I. So all you're hearing today on the radio are solo artists for the most part. 99%. What happened? I miss bands. Blackstreet, Jodeci, Mint Condition, all the great bands, rock bands, Pearl Jam, all the great bands of the 90s and 80s. What happened? We're going to get into it, guys. I want you guys to check this out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit me the notification bell. I will hit you back if you comment. All right, let's go.
Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. I came across this video from a British talk show a couple weeks ago with a guy named Richard Osman. And he was talking about there are no bands on the charts anymore. And he was specifically talking about the British charts, but let's explore this a little bit. Let me play you the video.
What has happened that is utterly extraordinary in the charts is the complete disappearance of bands. The complete disappearance of bands, and so soloists and duos and, collaborations of soloists, Dave and Central C, all this sort of thing, are so dominant. I'll tell you how dominant they are. We've had half a decade, roughly so far, the first half of the 2020s. So I looked at the first half of the 1980s, and in the first half of the 1980s, there were 146 weeks when bands were number one. 146 weeks. You had Dexys, you got UB40, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Duran, Culture Club, Pretenders, Spandau Ballet, Adam and the Ants, loads and loads, 146. The first half of the 90s, there were 141 weeks when bands were number one. New Kids on the Block, Wet, 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 Erasure, Take That, loads and loads. So we've got 146, 141. In the first 5 years of this decade, 3 weeks.
No.
We have had 3 number one weeks, one of which was the Radio 1 Live Lounge All-Stars, most of whom were soloists anyway. One of which was the Beatles, when they had the lovely comeback single, and one of which was Little Mix. And that's the only kind of official band who've had a single week at number one in this entire decade.
Oh my God.
Now, Richard Osman's talking about bands that are at the top of the British charts from the 80s through the 2000s. But historically, starting in the 50s, bands dominated through all genres of music, but especially rock music. Bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys, the Who, the Doors, Cream, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix Experience, Pink Floyd, the Allman Brothers Band.
Man, don't you miss these guys? Don't you miss bands like this, man? Serious, real talk. Male camaraderie on stage. Everybody's just vibing off of each other. Look, working with the MPG was at the height of my career, working with the new power generation. And I'm telling you guys something, being on stage with all men and you guys are just, everybody's just superiorly talented. Man, it doesn't get any better than that, man. Something is going on with the higher ups to where they're not allowing bands to come out and dominate the mainstream today. Am I right, guys, or what, huh? Yes, so real talk. Hit me up in the comments, guys. Let's talk about this. I miss seeing guys on stage performing. Let's go.
And Deep Purple, Queen, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Bee Gees, the Commodores, Fleetwood Mac, Earth, Wind and Fire, The Police, Dire Straits, Van Halen, Journey, AC/DC, Genesis, Yes, U2, Tears for Fears, Living Colour, Nirvana, The Smashing Pumpkins, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots, Radiohead, Oasis, Blink-182. Rap and hip-hop of the 90s also had ensembles. Artists like Wu-Tang Clan.
Let's get into it. Am I right, guys, or what? Yeah, let's go. Let's go. Sir, this lineup he's about to name now dominated the 90s, the mid-90s on up. Let's go.
Tribe Called Quest,
Yeah.
NWA, Outkast, Fugees, Bone Thugs and Harmony, Cypress Hill, Public Enemy, Beastie Boys, The Roots. The other amazing thing about these bands is that they wrote their own songs.
Yep.
Now, you would have artists like the Supremes or the Jackson 5 that were part of Motown that have songwriters like Holland Dozier Holland that wrote for the Supremes, or the Corporation that wrote for the Jackson 5. But for the most part, they wrote their own songs. Now, you would have artists from the 70s and 80s that would actually split off. For example, Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins from Genesis, or Sting from The Police, that would make their own solo records and have massive hits that they still wrote themselves.
Yep.
This didn't really change until the late 90s.
Get
and
into
early
it.
2000s.
Let's get into it. Hit me up in the comments, guys. Hit me up in the comments. These guys getting to the meat of it all. I love it. I love it. I am doing this, guys, for the real musicians out there. I'm doing this for the real musicians. Hit me up in the comments, man. I will call you out in the comments. All right, let's go.
Thousands. This is when you started to have boy bands, for example, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, that would have these co-writer producers or writer producers that would write their huge hits. This is where people like Max Martin started to come on the scene. And this also happened in rock music. I know because I was part of this thing, being a producer / songwriter. You started to see artists like Aerosmith that had Diane Warren writing their biggest hit they ever had, their only #1, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, which came out in the early 90s, and rock bands of the early 2000s that would almost invariably have producer songwriters that would make their record. And this really happened because the labels got involved, the A&R people. They were making less money because they were selling less records, and they wanted to guarantee that they had huge hit songs on every record. So they would actually hire songwriter producers or get multiple songwriters to contribute to the record. These would be rock bands that would appear to be bands, but they'd actually be co-writers or producers writing and making the records themselves and not even including the band in there. I've gone over this in past videos. And this ultimately led to the demise of the bands, in my view.
Yep.
If you're going to have someone like myself, for example, that the label's going to hire to co-write with the singer of a band, and I play all the parts on it, and I get a session drummer to come in, even though the band's got a drummer. By 2010, it just made no sense to actually sign bands because it wasn't worth it. And that
Because on top of that, the bands have now, in the mid to late 90s, are losing their identity because of this new model that these record labels have pushed out. Here's one of the reasons why you don't see bands anymore. Am I right, guys, or what? Yep. Let's get it, man. Let's go.
That brings us to where we are today. If you go to the top 50 chart right now in the US, you have Sabrina Carpenter, you have Lady Gaga, Bruno Mars, you have Jimin, you have Chappell Roan, Billie Eilish, Post Malone, Morgan Wallen, Shabuzi, Kendrick Lamar, Tommy Richmond, Hozier, Zach Bryan, Casey Musgraves, Benson Boone, Teddy Swims. It's just literally all solo artists.
Yep.
So next is an experiment. I put together a list of the top 400 artists in ranking of monthly listeners on Spotify, and I looked to see how many bands on there were created in the last 10 years. Take a guess how many. You might think, oh, I don't know, 25 bands, something like that, in the top 400. Has to be a lot, right? It's actually only 3.
The record industry then went to hell. Real talk. Am I right, guys, or what? This is crazy. That is crazy. Who'd have ever known that? That is crazy. There is something going on that's out here that's bigger than us that do not want bands back on the scene. Am I right, guys, or what? Huh? Am I right or what? Let's go. Let's go. Hit me up in the comments. Hit me up in the comments. I will hit you back.
Only 3 bands in the top 400 artists on Spotify
Whoa.
have formed within the last 10 years. 3. Now, let me actually just read you off the top of the chart so you know what I'm talking about. The new number 1 artist on Spotify is Billie Eilish. She has 105 million monthly listeners. Just below that, The Weeknd, 104 million, number 2. Bruno Mars is number 3 at 100 million. Taylor Swift has 93 million, number 4. Lady Gaga has 89 million, 638,000, number 5. Coldplay, here's the first band, has 89,598,000. Now, Coldplay was formed in 1997. Okay, so last century. To get to the first...
And here's the funny part, too. 90% of the artists that you saw on that list right now couldn't even compete with the guys back in the 80s and the 70s and the early 90s. Am I right, guys, or what? 90% of them are controlled. Writers, producers, engineers, they're all puppets. They're all puppets. Let's go.
First group that was formed within the last 10 years that's on this chart, you have to go down to 135.
Wow.
That's Grupo Frontera. They've got 32 million monthly listeners. They were formed in 2022. The next one is Måneskin. You remember them from Eurovision from, what one is it, 2017 or so? They won that. They're ranked at 248 with 24 million monthly listeners. They were formed in 2016. And then Richie Mitch and the Coal Miners had 328, 21 million monthly listeners, formed in 2017. Those are the only 3. So it's less than 1%. There's 3 in 400. That's really amazing.
Man, this is wild. It just makes you want to cry for the music industry, man. It makes you want to cry for the music game. There is no more music industry, guys. Do you understand that? Do you understand that? Let's get it. Let's go. Let's go.
So what are some other factors that led to the demise of bands from the 60s through the early 2000s? One of them is the changing tastes of people. Rock is just not popular. It doesn't connect with young people like it did back then. Probably because there's no bands out there. Another reason could be advancements in technology. With modern technology, a single artist can produce high-quality, studio-grade tracks on a laptop, eliminating the need for a full band and simplifying the production process. Band dynamics. It's hard to be in a band. Forming and maintaining a band is challenging due to interpersonal conflicts.
That's going to be fucking cover of Modern Drummer magazine is going to be fucking devoted to that drum fill, It's amazing that you could play that drum fill in 9 beats.
The economics of promotion. It's cheaper and more efficient for labels to market one individual over a group, as solo artists are easier to brand, manage, and promote across media. I don't see this changing anytime soon. I'd be really curious to hear your opinion on it. Leave it in the comments. Hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.
Guys, thank you for another episode from the Dewan Elliott Podcast. Look, man, we just getting down to the getting good, man, of what's really going on with the music game. Am I right, guys, or what? Yeah, man. We're in trouble. No, we're beyond trouble. We're beyond trouble. I mean, it speaks a lot to society, to the point to where people can't work together today. Everything is about self, which says a lot. This is probably the main reason why you're not seeing the bands on the scene anymore, because it's all about me. Am I right, guys, or what? Give yourselves another round of applause for coming in for another episode from the Dewan Elliott Podcast. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Woo. This is exciting. Guys, don't forget, leave a comment, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for when every time I release episodes, you get it. Let's get out of here. We out of here. Thanks, guys. Peace.